Finally tonight, a visit with comedian Dave Chappelle and how he's returned in a major way this past year. Jeffrey Brown has a look at how Chappelle's stand-up shows on Netflix are getting lots of attention, but are also the subject of criticism in a way that's different from the past.
Ask Dave Chappelle about the job of being a comedian. He says this.
I don't think people pay money to see a guy speak precisely and carefully. I don't think they want to pay to see somebody worried about the repercussions. What they say, they just want to see someone try to get at something honest or maybe something relatable or have some fun with something.
Don't you think it was like a little suspicious? Just a little suspicious? Every dead black person the police find has crack sprinkled on them. I mean, come on, man.
Beginning in the mid-90s in TV specials.
Good evening and welcome to the first and maybe only racial draft here in New York City.
And in his brilliant Comedy Central Chappelle show, Dave Chappelle made a name for himself as one of the smartest and sharpest comedians around. Always unpredictable, but alive to the craziness and contradictions of American culture, especially the way it deals with race.
For shizzle.
He walked away from the limelight for nearly a decade, making only occasional appearances.
This is the age of spin.
But starting last fall, he returned in a big way, releasing 4 Netflix specials, winning a Grammy for Best Comedy Album, and touring the country with his stand-up. We talked recently before a show at San Francisco's historic Fillmore Auditorium.
I started really young, so you got to think like this relationship I have with an audience is one of the most consistent relationships that I have in my life at my age.
Yeah.
This idea of talking to people this way and them listening, but it means a lot for people to be able to stand up somewhere and say, well, this is what I think, or this is how I feel.
I'm black, but I'm also Dave Chappelle.
There's still plenty of side-splitting humor, and Chappelle's continued to push buttons. But now many are pushing back, critical of his jokes involving transgender people, for example, and parts of his routine that focus on sexual misconduct charges against prominent men, including fellow comedian Louis C.K.
This is like where it's hard to be a man. One lady said, Louis C.K. masturbating in front of me ruined my comedy dreams. Word? Well, then I dare say, madam, you may have never had a dream. Come on, man, that's a brittle spirit.
A regular theme for Chappelle now, that Americans today are overly sensitive about what can and cannot be said in public. I asked if he felt that way.
Yes and no. Sometimes I think that we're painfully desensitized because we're bombarded by so much information. And then other times I see people, it's a lot to be mad at, especially when you know so much. So I think it's a challenging time. And I think that in a time like that, I, for one, find solace in the arts. I don't have to agree with all the art I consume, but it helps me understand how I actually feel about it.
Are you surprised, though, by the criticism that's come your way?
No, and I don't mind that people get upset. Some of this criticism, like, is helpful. Like, I get educated by it. I don't necessarily agree with all of it, but I learn about a lot of things, you know, just from my critics.
One recent special titled Bird Revelation began with Chappelle thinking aloud about humor's boundaries.
So I say a lot of mean things. But you guys gotta remember, I'm not saying it to be mean. I'm saying it because it's funny. And everything's funny till it happens to you.
If bad things happen to someone else, that's not necessarily funny.
Look at it this way. I grew up in the crack epidemic. I tell jokes about it. I grew up in the crack epidemic, and now there's an opioid epidemic. Are they treating the opioid epidemic the way that they treated the crack epidemic? No, this is a national health emergency. When we were coming up, we were policed by the National Guard, addicts were criminals. Now they understand addicts are sick people. And maybe it's because the demographic of the opioid epidemic is not the same demographic of the crack epidemic.
Racially. I mean,
Right.
you're talking about race.
Right, so now that your community is getting destroyed, it's a whole nother ball game. And then it's a huge window of empathy. Oh my God, we can see each other. We both went through similar pain. But I'm just saying, everything's funny that happens to you is more about empathy. That you there but for the grace of God type thing.
Scary being a white dude now, isn't it? A little bit, no? Well, you're not gonna get me too. It's funny for black dudes to see white people go through this because this is how it always is for us. All my heroes is either murdered by the government or registered sex offenders.
In the Me Too moment, does
Okay.
that change the line for you of what you feel you can say or not say?
Honestly speaking, I have no idea.
Really?
I don't know. Like, we're all figuring this out, I think, at the same time together. It's a huge collective moment. But as a comedian, I mean, it'd be a very, very difficult thing not to talk about. As a human, it's a very difficult thing not to feel, to be indifferent to. Everywhere you look in America, everyone's pushing the line. In one way or another, you know, we got this president because some people say we got to push the line, and we have this movement because people are like we got to push the line, and we got another movement because these people say this is a really busy time. I don't know what the line is. But there's a lot of changes.
Obviously, Bill Cosby was a hero to me.
Chappelle often talks of Bill Cosby in his routines.
My God, you can't imagine. It'd be as if you heard that chocolate ice cream itself had raped 54 people. You'd say to yourself, oh man, but I like chocolate ice cream. I don't want it to rape.
Our conversation took place soon after Cosby's conviction, and Chappelle spoke of watching one of his victims outside the court.
And I remember seeing her sobbing. And the emotional content of her crying, only she knows what that meant to her. But, you know, justice was meted out for this woman, and it didn't look gleeful. You know what I mean? Like, it's tough to see your heroes fall, let alone be a villain. I was explaining some of my younger family members, you know, like who he was at one point juxtaposed to what's happening now. It's astounding. And it's sad for everybody. It's very, 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 it felt like this is important.
Dave Chappelle says that while he walked away from all this once, he continues to enjoy getting up on stage. Sometimes, he told me, I have things to say. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Jeffrey Brown at the Fillmore Auditorium in San Francisco.
Some sobering words.